Hello there, weary traveler, and welcome to this cozy corner of history. Before we drift back to the brutal winters of medieval times, I am so glad you re-hear whether you re-curled up for sleep or simply unwinding. If you don't mind, leave a quick comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always a joy to see our little map of night owls and early birds. And if these calm journeys soothe you, tap subscribe so you don't miss the next one. For now, let the modern world soften and fade as we step into the snow. Picture a small village tucked into a fold of hills, where the wind moves like a slow brush over thatch and hedgerow, and where smoke rises in straight, pale threads that look almost like strings, tying each house to the sky. The fields lie quiet under a thin crust of frost, stubble shining like tiny needles in the cold light, and the pond wears a rim of glass so delicate that a thrown twig skitters and sings before it stops. Winter is not a surprise here. It is a guest everyone prepares for together, not with a single grand gesture, but with 1,000 small, careful habits that turn luck into survival. In a cottage near the lane lives Thomas, a plowman's son with hands that know the weight of wet soil and the patient rhythm of a flail, a man whose wealth is measured in skill, in cleanly stacked wood, and in the quiet respect of neighbors. On the rise above the village stands the manor house, square-shouldered against the wind, and in its warmest room sits Lady Isabel, Lord Geoffrey's daughter, calm-eyed and quick-witted, who keeps a ledger of grain and a list of names for alms, and who believes that numbers only matter when they remember people. Between these two worlds rides Sir Aldrich, a neighboring knight who knows the worth of a good hedge and a straight road, and who speaks easily at the Lord's table, yet reins in his horse to greet old men mending gates as if they were his own uncles. The first real frost comes just after Martinmas, crisping the edges of every leaf and turning breath into a soft fog that hangs one heartbeat before dissolving into the morning. Preparation deepens into practice. Thomas repairs a gap in the byre wall with fresh-cut stakes and woven brush, his fingers moving by memory, the hedge becoming a living fence that slows the wind and holds warmth like a secret. Lady Isabel walks the storerooms with the steward, counting sacks of rye and barley, noting which barrels hold salted meat and which still wait for brine, asking quietly how many widows came to the gate last week and how many will come tomorrow. Sir Aldrich helps his men unload a cart of split logs, the sound of wood on wood sharp and satisfying in the cold air, and he speaks with the reeve about keeping the road passable for the mill, because a still mill is a hungry village. In the cottages, the hearth becomes the sun. A pot hangs on an iron hook and does not leave for days, pottage thickening and thinning, turning roots and grains, and the last scraps of autumn into the kind of warmth that begins in the hands and ends in the heart. Children learn the shape of winter by carrying kindling in small bundles, and by the feel of a rushlight guttering, and then righting itself when cupped from the draught. The first snow does not come as a storm, but as a hush, soft flakes settling on shoulders and lashes, making even old fences look like new lace. Thomas crosses the green with a neatly bound stack of withies for mending and meats. Isabel at the manor gate as she steps out with a small basket of candle stubs for the almoner, and their greeting is a simple exchange of nods that feels, somehow, like the lighting of a lamp. Sir Aldrich sits his horse and watches the sky for weather and the lane for trouble, and when he sees the nod, he says nothing at all, because a wise man knows there are truths that must be learned slowly, like winter roads. In the mill yard, the wheel still turns, though a collar of ice has begun to form along the stream's edge, and each creak sounds like a question the miller answers with a careful hand to the sluice. Thomas spends a long afternoon with an axe and a patient log, splitting and stacking, leaving space for air, because he knows that dry wood burns like a friend and damp wood burns like a debt. Isabel closes the shutters early against the blue dusk and moves a brazier near an old woman's chair, her voice low and steady as she asks about coughs and about the baby in the cottage by the orchard who was feverish last week and now sleeps easier. Sir Aldrich orders the hedges near the open fields to be laid, stakes set, brush woven, the living wood bent to thicken and regrow, because a good hedge is a wall that stays kind. At church, the village gathers under a roof that holds both smoke and prayer, and the priest speaks of patience, which is the winter's first virtue, and of generosity, which is its last. Thomas stands near the back with men who smell of hay and leather. Isabel near the front beside her father, Sir Aldrich on the side aisle, helm in hand, head bowed, and though they do not speak, each feels the quiet weight of the other two and understands, without names, that their seasons are tied. The days settle into a rhythm that is both simple and exacting, threshing in the barn by a shaft of light, chaff rising like pale smoke before settling, mending harness by the hearth, the needle making small steady journeys from one side of a tier to the other. Isabel measures out a sack of grain into many bowls, each a promise that keeps the wolf of hunger one step farther from a door, and she writes the names of those who received, not in a ledger of stone shillings, but in her own memory. Sir Aldrich rides the boundary and notes the places where the road will ice first, plans a path for carts to avoid the worst ruts, and chooses the small kindness of sending a bundle of firewood to a cottage without a name on the note. Thomas and his sister Maud wash sand into a trough to store carrots and beets in neat layers that keep their crispness for months, and they stack the onions hung on braided cords where mice are least likely to travel. When the cold sharpens, sleeping becomes a two-part song. First sleep deep and heavy, then a quiet waking in the middle of the night, a time for stoking embers, a murmured prayer, a soft word, and the warm comfort of knowing exactly where your people are. In that midnight watch, Thomas steps outside and hears snow ticking on thatch, sees the world turned to pearl, and thinks of Isabel's eyes in the dim light of the church. He shakes his head and smiles at himself, then goes in to warm his hands. Isabel sits by her window with a small lamp and reads a psalm until the letters blur, then rests her hand on the ledger as if numbers were a sleeping child, and she breathes slowly, thinking of faces, not figures. Sir Aldrich lies awake on a travel-worn pallet in the Manor's guest room and listens to the draft talk under the door, and he thinks of bridges and barns and the kind of futures that must be built in winter if they are to stand in spring. A thin ice skin takes the mill pond overnight, and the miller knocks at it with a stick until the sound changes from drum to bell, a sign that will hold a child's careful foot tomorrow, but not a cart, not yet. Thomas carries a creel of sticks to the widow Agnes and sets it by her hearth, and she presses a rosy apple into his hand, last of her basket, and he takes it as if it were summer itself returning for a moment. Isabel joins the almoner at the gate, handing out small loaves and a dab of dripping for each, her fingers brushing the rough hands of men and women who speak thanks as if the word itself were a coal placed in the palm. Sir Aldrich calls to Thomas across the green and asks, with a nod, if he will help mend a fence at the far meadow. It is not a command, nor a test, but a bridge built of useful work. They work side by side in the pale sun, driving stakes and weaving brush, and the talk is easy. About weather, and the way the ground sounds when it is ready to take a plow, and Aldrich notes the way Thomas looks at the land as if it were a friend who speaks softly. In the manor kitchen, the steam hangs heavy, thick with the smell of onions and barley, and Isabel consults with the cook about stretching the salted meat through the hungry gap, about saving the last onions for the worst weeks, about making a feast day feel like a fire in the dark. Winter games come out when the night grows long. A board scratched with lines for 9 men, SMRS, a handful of stones for a clacking count, riddles that travel from house to house and grow funnier in the telling. Thomas brings a warmed stone wrapped in cloth to the foot of the bed before first sleep, and Maud laughs at his fussing and then sighs into the warmth, as if she had never doubted him. Isabel learns from the midwife which herbs ease a cough, and she sets a small box aside with thyme and sage and a square of linen, resolving to carry it with her when she visits the cottages. Sir Aldrich receives a letter from his steward about a bridge plank loosened by ice, and he goes himself to see it, kneeling in the snow to test each nail with his knife, because some tasks cannot be sent, they must be held in the hand. The snow deepens, muffling the world, so that the only sounds are the creak of a cart and the quick trill of a wren, brave and bright in the hedge. Thomas joins other men for threshing, flails rising and falling in a rhythm that soothes, and he thinks of bread as a shape of hope, round and warm and enough for today. Isabel passes the barn and pauses to watch the work. The golden spill of grain, the soft cloud of chaff catching light. Sir Aldrich notes the glance and says nothing, not out of jealousy, but because he understands that winter teaches patience, and that some stories are better told by the slow turn of a season than by any man's quick hand. The village oven, lit once a week, becomes a small sun. Families bring dough marked with a cut or a twist, and the baker slides each loaf in with a practiced turn, and when the door opens, the steam is like blessing. Isabel leaves a loaf at a cottage door with no knock, and Thomas, passing, recognizes her hand by the way the cloth is folded, and he smiles and looks away, because some kindness wants to be anonymous, and he will honor that. Sir Aldrich meets Lord Geoffrey by the fire, and speaks of roads and stores and duties, then, more carefully, of futures and marriage. And though his voice is steady, the flame throws quick light and shadow over his thoughts. The cold tightens further, and the mill wheel slows, until one morning it halts, with a sound like a sigh swallowed back, and the miller rubs his hands and looks to the sky as if the sun might answer a practical question. Thomas and Aldrich go down to the stream with poles and axes, breaking ice in sheets that slide under and away, their breath white, their sleeves wet to the elbow. And when the wheel shudders and turns again, both men grin like boys. Isabel brings a basket to the mill with a wedge of cheese and a jar of pickled cabbage, the brine cloudy and bright, and the miller's wife wipes her eyes with the edge of her sleeve, and says, "The village will remember this day when bread did not stop." In the cottages, a cough moves from house to house like a slow echo, and Isabel's herb box becomes a small, traveling cabinet of mercy. Thyme steeped with honey, cloth warmed and laid on chests, windows cracked for air, shutters closed again. Thomas carries 2 buckets of clean snow to melt for washing, and he laughs when the cat tries to catch the dripping water in the hearth's glow, a small absurdity that feels like a feast. Sir Aldrich has a hare from the hunt sent quietly to the poorest cottage, and he declines to sit at the high table that night, choosing instead a bench by the fire with the reeve, where the talk is about nails and plows and the timing of spring. The hungry gap begins not with hunger, but with counting. Barrels sink by inches, the onion ropes grow thin, the last apples wrinkle in their baskets, and the cook's skill becomes the village's good fortune. Thomas saves a handful of barley back for seed, even when his stomach argues otherwise, and he ties the sack closed with a firm knot that feels like a vow. Isabel speaks to the steward about a second, smaller alms for those with children and for those who have cared for the sick, and she takes off her gloves not because the room is warm, but because she wants to feel the weight of each portion in her bare hands. Sir Aldrich walks the lane at dusk and hears a song drifting from Thomas's cottage, a soft thread of sound about a green field and a black bird, and he stops for a moment and lets the song sit with him until the cold sets a gentle hand on his shoulder and asks him to move again. A brief thaw spreads water over hard ground like a glaze, then the cold returns with teeth, shutters rattle. Smoke dips and flattens, the road decides to be more ice than earth. Thomas takes a tumble carrying kindling and bursts into laughter as he sits in the snow, and Maud's laughter answers from the doorway. And for a long minute they cannot stop, and that minute is worth a warm meal. Isabel, returning from a visit, meets Thomas at the lane corner, her basket light, his arms full of wood, and for a span of heartbeats they simply stand, not from lack of words, but because the air between them is gentle and full. Sir Aldrich watches from the bend and feels 2 truths at once, that he could make a kind husband and a strong protector, and that he is not the only answer to the question Isabel asks in her quiet heart. Candlemas arrives with the blessing of wax, short tapers lifted like small suns in the nave, and the children stare as if summer had walked back in on tiptoe. Thomas brings brush to the bonfire and stands in the edge of the heat, cheeks pink, eyes bright, Isabel a few steps away, Aldrich just beyond, and for a long moment they are 3 people warmed by the same flame, surprised to discover how easy it is to share the light. The days lengthen by a finger's breadth, icicles drip at noon. The mill wheel speaks in a livelier voice, and in the ditches a green rumor begins, nettles and sorrel testing the air. Thomas kneels at the plow and runs his hand along the iron, imagining the first furrow, the smell of turned earth like bread just broken. Isabel draws a line down her ledger from winter to spring and writes a new list, seed to borrow, tools to mend, names to visit, thanks to give. Sir Aldrich writes to his steward to bring men for the bridge, and he pens a second note he does not send, a note that begins, "My lady," and ends with nothing written at all, because some words must be spoken when the air is warmer. In a cottage near the orchard, a baby cough fades, a chest eases, a mother sleeps, and the world feels, for a while, kind and possible. The cold lingers, but it has lost its strictness. The wind still bites, yet the sun answers back. And in the balance, a village remembers that survival is not one great leap, but many small steps taken together. Thomas carries a small loaf, still warm, to the widow, Agnes. Isabel carries a candle stub to a house with a cracked window. Sir Aldrich carries a plank to the bridge. And the three of them, in their different ways, hold up the same winter sky. When the stars come out, they are sharper than ever, as if the air had been polished. And the village sleeps in two parts, and wakes, and sleeps again. And in that rhythm the heart learns a lesson it will use all its life. Patience, courage, kindness, repeat. In the morning, a robin lands on the hedge and looks into the yard like a cheerful messenger, and someone, somewhere, laughs at the way it cocks its head as if it had just told a very good joke and is waiting for you to understand it. Spring is close enough to taste, sour and green, and the village leans toward it, as a plant leans toward light. Yet winter keeps a gentle hand on their shoulders, and reminds them to move slowly, to finish the mending, to count the seed twice, and the gratitude 3 times. The snow will go, the ground will open, the plow will bite, and the story of Thomas and Isabel and Sir Aldrich will step into longer days, but for now the hearth holds steady, and the night is kind, and the lesson of the cold is written quietly on every face. Do the next small thing well, and do it together. Winter still has a few lessons to teach before it loosens its hand. The wind comes soft one day and sharp the next, and everyone learns to be grateful for the days that stay in the middle. In the lane, Thomas turns the last of the good straw into fresh bedding for the byre, layering it thick so the cows breathe warm and calm through the night. He checks the gate latch twice, because small certainties make winter kinder. Isabel walks the storerooms and notes the level of each barrel with a bit of chalk, a quiet ledger written on wood. She smiles to see that the pickled cabbage is holding well, the brine still bright and steady. Sir Aldrich brings a farrier to the manor yard to see 2 hooves and shoes before the thaw turns roads to ruts. Sparks ring in the cold as nails are set, and horses stand patient, warm breath folding into the air. Shrovetide comes, and with it the gentle clearing of the larder before the long weeks of Lent. In some cottages, a thin pancake sizzles on the griddle, a rare sweetness turned quickly and shared, a treat made from careful leftovers and a hopeful heart. The bell in the church tower rings a little longer that day, calling people to confession and to the easy relief of setting burdens down before the long plain days begin. Even the sound feels like sweeping a floor. Thomas wraps his cloak tight. He cuts shallow channels with a spade so the thaw will drain more quickly. Small rivers that turn marsh into soil a week sooner. Isabel joins the almoner at the gate and presses a few dried apples into a girl's hand. The slices wrinkled and sweet, a memory of late summer that brings color to the girl's face. Sir Aldrich rides the lower meadow and marks with a stick where the bridge will need a second brace. He thinks about weight and time and the patience that good timber requires. On a blue afternoon, Thomas hears a thin cry from the far side of the hedge. A lamb has come early into the cold, a damp bundle in the snow. He moves slowly, talking in a low voice, and wraps the lamb in his cloak without hurry. Isabel, returning from a visit, sees him kneeling there and kneels too, cupping the small head in warm hands while Thomas tucks the cloak close. They walk together to the shepherd's hut, breath white, eyes bright, the lamb quiet against Thomas's chest. Sir Aldrich meets them on the path and says only "Well done," and offers his own cloak to lay over the lamb. 3 sets of footprints, 1 gentle rescue, a small life returned to warmth. The shepherd's wife sets the lamb near the hearth, and the creature's ears lift toward the heat like little sails finding a wind. There is a murmur of thanks, and no one makes a speech. Winter prizes deeds over words. At home, Thomas feels the echo of Isabel's hands warming his for a moment through the cloak. He says nothing to Maud about it, and everything to the fire, by the way he coaxes it into a steady glow. Isabel sits by her window and watches the last light turn the fields to pewter. She traces a circle on the glass where her breath fogs it, and thinks of a lamb's small heartbeat and the steadiness of Thomas's voice. Sir Aldrich writes a line in his notebook: "Bridge, barley, hedges," and then, smaller, "consider futures." He closes the cover and sleeps lightly, as a man does who is learning patience. Lent begins, and meals step back from richness with a sigh rather than a complaint. Fish takes a larger place on the table where it can, and greens, when they appear, are greeted like old friends. Thomas repairs the yoke and rubs it with oil, so it will sit kindly on the shoulders of the oxen when the first plowing begins. He checks the pins and pegs and lays them out in order, as if arranging a tune. Isabel visits the midwife and learns how to fold a cloth for comfort under a tired back. She carries this knowledge home the way she carries candles, steady, with the flame shielded from drafts. Sir Aldrich meets with Lord Geoffrey and speaks of days and of easing them during the first week of ploughing, so the village can set seed without stumbling. Lord Geoffrey listens, weighing justice against habit. He nods, and a small burden lifts from many backs. The snow withdraws in curls from the ditch edges, and the earth shows itself in bars of brown between white. Children run along these bars as if they were roads drawn just for them. Thomas and the smith set the plowshare to the anvil, hammering out the nicks winter has put there, heating, quenching, hardening. The iron takes on a cleaner edge, a promise shaped to the field. Isabel writes a new list in a firm hand: seed to borrow, seed to return, tools to lend, visits to make, and at the end, a line not for work at all. Stand a while under the willow and breathe. Sir Aldrich walks the bridge with a carpenter, talking about braces and joints, about how wood moves when it is dry and when it is wet, and about how a thing built well is a kind of prayer. In the cottages, people turn their garments and sew new seams into old cloth. A shirt worn thin at the elbows earns a second life, and a cloak gains a new lining from a blanket that has done its best for many years. Thomas brings the widow Agnes a small bundle of nettles, careful to fold them in leaves so they do not sting. She smiles at the green, chops them fine, and turns them into a soup that tastes like the first proper day of spring. Isabel watches 2 girls chalk a game on the stones, and the sound of their laughter makes the whole lane feel warmer by a few degrees. She thinks that joy is a kind of fuel and should be stored just as carefully as wood. Sir Aldrich loosens a nail with the claw of his hammer and drives it home again. Satisfied by the clean sound it makes when it seats, he has learned to like the honesty of tools. A rain comes, soft and patient, and the thatch drinks and then sheds it, and the fields loosen under the touch. The mill wheel turns with a more eager voice, and flour grows in sacks like a quiet snowfall. Thomas harnesses the oxen with hands that move as if they remember every spring of his life. The first furrow opens, dark and rich, and the smell of new earth lifts into the morning like bread just broken. Isabel stands at the edge of the field with a basket of seed. She watches the steady cut of the plow, the way the soil rolls and settles, and when Thomas looks up, their eyes meet in a calm that feels like a vow to be careful with each other's days. Sir Aldrich measures the pace of the oxen and does the sums in his head about how many acres can be turned before the next rain. He is pleased, not with his figures, but with the sight of a plan becoming ground. Work fills the hours, not in a rush, but in a long, steady line. Men guide plows and mend their own ruts. Women broadcast seed with careful hands that learn the weight of each grain. Children carry water and nip the soil between fingers to feel its readiness. Thomas shows Maud how to scatter seed with a swing of the wrist that makes an arc as even as a drawn line. She laughs when the breeze catches it just right, and he laughs too, because the field feels like a friend again. Isabel organizes a simple meal for the Sewers at midday, bread and a little cheese and a warm drink, and she takes the last cup herself, only after the basket is empty. No one says so, but everyone sees. Sir Aldrich rides the boundary and turns away a stray pig gently, speaking to it as if it were a child. He fixes a loose board in the fence with the flat of his hand and a quick nail, and the day moves a little easier. In the evenings, Bodies set down their tiredness like buckets after a long carry. The hearth gathers faces. The stories are shorter now, but sweeter for it. A song finds its way around the room and settles like a shawl on the shoulders of the old. Thomas sits on the threshold and lets the day run back through his mind like a stream he has crossed. He thinks of furrows and footsteps, of seed and sky, and of Isabel's quiet smile. Isabel writes her father's letters by lamplight, steady, precise. When she pauses, it is not to doubt the words, but to remember the feel of earth crumbling in her palm when she tested it by the field. Sir Aldrich drafts an agreement for shared use of the mill during high water and low, fair to both manors, kind to the village. He takes pleasure in fairness that can be written down and in kindness that cannot, but still holds. A clear night brings stars with edges. Sleep comes quickly, in one piece now, more often than two, as the day's work gathers people into a single deep rest. In the morning, the robin returns to the hedge and scolds pleasantly until a crumb appears at the sill. Its cheer feels like an old joke told again, because it is worth telling. Thomas lifts his eyes across the field and finds Isabel by the willow, as she promised herself, standing a moment with her hands folded, breathing as if the world had decided to be spacious again. Sir Aldrich dismounts at the far gate and walks the last stretch on foot, choosing to make small the distance between rank and road, as if to tell the land and the people both that he belongs on the ground as much as in the saddle. The village, which has been a winter house for months, steps out into the longer light with a quiet pride. They have carried each other through the strictest weather, and now the earth invites them to write new lines across its surface. Thomas guides the plow, straight and true. Isabel measures and gives Sir Aldrich plans and steadies, and together they show how people endure winters that would have taken them alone. When the bell in the tower rings noon, it sounds less like a warning and more like an invitation. People answer with bread and a few words and a look that says, "We have made it this far. Let's go a little farther together." The sowing begins in earnest, and the village breathes in time with the swing of arms and the soft rain of grain. The land answers with a quiet it keeps only for this work. Thomas walks the long strips with a measured stride, casting seed from his hand in even arcs that shine for a heartbeat in the light before they fall. Behind him, a brush harrow of bundled thorn drags lightly to tuck the grain out of the sight of birds. Isabel stands at the headland with a basket and a small ledger, not to count people as if they were coins, but to note who needs seed borrowed and who will have enough to lend back at harvest. She moves between groups with a warm word, no more official than necessary. Sir Aldrich paces the boundary on foot, reins over his arm, speaking softly to the men mending gaps and setting markers. He marks the damp patches with a stick, so no one wastes good seed on ground that one yet take it. Children clack wooden rattles and sing bird-scaring rhymes, delighted by their own important noise. A boy in a red cap holds his rattle high like a banner and marches along the ridge, proud to be part of the sowing. At midday, the sowers gather in the lee of a hedge. Bread and a sliver of cheese pass from hand to hand. A warm drink, steamed with a sprig of something green, makes its way around the circle. Laughter is small and easy, a sound that makes the food taste better. The weather remembers it can be tricky. A thin sleet comes one afternoon, fine as dust, stinging and brief. Thomas keeps sowing until the wind shifts, then tucks the basket under his cloak and waits out the squall with his back to a well-set hedge. Isabel lifts her cloak to shelter a small flame for a mother warming a baby's hands. The moment is tiny and ordinary, and it feels like something the winter taught them all to do without thinking. Sir Aldrich helps a cart out of a shallow rut with his shoulder and a laugh. The wheel finds its path again, and the driver's thanks are simple and genuine. It is good to be useful in ways that need no title. The ground opens a little more each day. Soil crumbles sweetly between fingers and falls back like a promise kept. When the evening light lays long across the fields, the sown strips look like lines written in a careful hand. Thomas passes near the willow where Isabel stands for a quiet breath most afternoons. Their greetings are unhurried. Words are not always necessary when the same work is written across two sets of hands. Sir Aldrich watches from the far gate and lets the two of them stand untroubled. He thinks of duty like a broad road and of kindness like a footpath that turns down toward a stream. He chooses the path that keeps the water clear. A week later, the village wakes to a white surprise. Snow has fallen lightly in the night, soft as dust, the kind that melts by noon but frightens tender plans. People stand in doorways and measure it with their eyes. Thomas brushes the snow from the furrows with a branch, more comfort than necessity. He hums the tune he keeps for careful tasks, the one that keeps his hands moving when his mind is wandering toward thoughts he has not put into words. Isabel carries a basket of straw to cover a shallow bed of early greens by the church wall. The straw makes a thin thatch against the sudden cold, enough to turn a sharp edge into a rounded one. She smiles at the smallness of the act and the largeness of its effect on her mood. Sir Aldrich calls to the shepherds and helps them move a handful of youth into the lean-to byre ahead of a chill wind. Wool and breath and the sweet smell of hay make a warm pocket against the day estric. By noon, the snow pulls back from the hedges like a curtain. Water scallops the road and then soaks inward, drunk by thirsty earth. The day remembers itself, and the sowing goes on. There are choices to make that have nothing to do with weather. Lord Geoffrey looks at Sir Aldrich across the manor table and speaks of marriage as a bridge between lands. The words are smooth, old, practiced, and heavy. Isabel folds her hands in her lap and feels the grain dust still there from the morning, a faint grit that links her more firmly to the field than to the map. She asks for time in a voice so calm it almost sounds like a prayer. Sir Aldrich nods, and the nod holds a kindness not all men would have shown. He knows a day's work cannot be measured only by acres turned or letters signed. Thomas hears nothing of this, only that the bell in the tower rings the hour in a tone that feels a little different. He ties his seed bag and sets it down, rubbing the grain between his fingers as if it could tell him the future. In the cottages, the hungry gap closes by inches. A pot of nettle soup glows a bright green on the hearth. Bread is thinner now, but still enough. A spoonful of last year's jam brings summer into the room for one short, sweet moment. Isabel visits the old women who sit by the window for light, bringing needles and a fresh length of thread. They talk about hymns and saints and whether that can't make up its mind. The talk settles the room like warm sand in a jar. Sir Aldrich checks the bridge again, this time with Thomas beside him, discussing the best places to set a brace, wooden and true. The two men speak like workmates, measures and timbers and the flow of water. Their ease with each other makes the day friendlier. A soft rain arrives at dusk, the kind that does not rush the ground, but persuades it. Thatch tick-ticks and gutters whisper. People sleep to that sound with an almost childlike contentment. The first shy sprouts show where the sowing was generous. You have to stoop to see them, to hold your breath, and let your eyes adjust to the smallness of new life. It feels like a secret past among friends. Thomas shows Maud the green thread running across the brown field and explains how to read it. She leans close and nods solemnly, then grins in a way that betrays how delighted she is. Isabel visits the field edge and kneels without caring about the damp on her gown. She touches a sprout as gently as one touches a sleeping child. The world is full of small braveries, she thinks. Perhaps this is one. Sir Aldrich finds Lord Geoffrey in a better mood and brings him news of the sprouts, as if he were announcing victories. The Lord smiles and forgets to be stern for a morning. Food is the kindest politics. There is a fair day in the market town, and a few people walk there with lists in their heads, coins tucked safe. Salt is dear, but necessary. A new needle is a small luxury with a large return. People come home with stories tucked into their bundles. Thomas brings back a length of cord and a tin whistle he pretends is for a neighbor's child. That night, he plays a soft tune at the threshold and laughs when Maud says, "Lower, the moon is sleeping." Isabel sends for a small roll of good linen and divides it into longer and shorter cuts. Part for bandages, part for a baby's shirt. She keeps one square for herself without deciding yet what it will become. Sir Aldrich returns with a new awl and an iron buckle that will outlast the strap it sits upon. He takes satisfaction in simple things that last. Spring's temper flares once more. A stiff wind from the east makes the day feel like early winter again. People bag their cloaks tighter and step into the gale, as if into a stubborn story they already know how to finish. Thomas adds another layer of rushes to the floor and laughs when the cat nests in the pile as if it were royalty. He lifts the cat gently and finishes the work with a hand that knows how to be careful. Isabel tells the steward to move the weakest candles to the front of the chest so they are used first. Waste is winter's enemy, even when the calendar says spring. Sir Aldrich rides to the far wood and notes where coppice is ready and where it must wait another year. He runs his hand along smooth new shoots and feels steadiness return to him from the living wood. A quiet moment at the field's edge brings all three together without plan. Thomas straightens from checking the sprouts. Isabel arrives with a basket of warm bread ends. Sir Aldrich with a flask of small ale. They share both without fuss. Words are easy when hands are full of honest work. They talk about the river's mood, the birds returning, the way the soil smells when it's in a forgiving humor. No one mentions the heavier subjects, and that restraint feels like respect. The next morning, Lord Geoffrey calls Isabel to the solar and speaks again of marriage. Not unkindly, but with a gravity born of winter's arithmetic. Isabel listens, and this time she answers more plainly. She will do her duty, but she will do it in a way that keeps her conscience warm. Sir Aldrich hears her and understands. He says he will not turn love into a lever. He asks only for openness and time. He has lived through enough winters to know that forcing a fire can put it out. Thomas, told nothing, goes on mending a gate with a steady rhythm, and yet he feels a lightness in the air that has nothing to do with weather. He hums the Whistle S tune under his breath and sets the last pin with a satisfied push. The sprouts stand a little taller, and the field shifts from brown to a slight green haze. The village feels richer simply by looking at it. Eyes feed the heart in ways the stomach understands later. Isabel meets the midwife again and carries a cradle board to a cottage where it will be needed soon. She stays to warm her hands and to hear a story about a spring so bright it made people sing while they weeded. She decides to believe in such springs. Sir Aldrich brings a young carpenter to the bridge and lets him lead the work under his eye. Teaching is a way to make skill survive its maker. He enjoys the sight of someone else's confidence finding its feet. Thomas shares a bowl of soup with the widow Agnes and leaves her a little packet of seed to scatter in the sunny corner by her door. Her thanks are simple. Sometimes the best prayers sound like conversation. A soft festival arrives Palm Sunday with willow branches where palms do not grow. Children wave them and whisper the words they've heard, not fully understanding, but fully pleased. The village looks warmer for the branches tucked behind door latches. Isabel returns from church with a branch and slides it into a crack in the beam above the hearth. It looks like a smile where wood meets stone. Sir Aldrich rides home by the long way, passing the field where Thomas works. He lifts a hand, and Thomas lifts his in return, to men content to see honest work in someone else's day. That night, the moon rises clean and white. Sleep comes easily, not because there is no care left in the world, but because the cares have turned into tasks, and tasks can be done. Morning brings a sky the color of pewter, and then, an hour later, the clear blue that has been missing for months. In that brightness, people walk a little faster, as if invited. Thomas sets his foot carefully at the headland, and turns the next strip with the oxen moving steady and sure. He glances up and sees Isabel by the willow, her face calm, her hands folded, keeping the promise she wrote to herself. Isabel smiles without announcement. The feeling is quiet and deep, like water in a well. It will be enough to draw from for a long time. Sir Aldrich closes his notebook on a page where the sums finally line up. He does not need to read the last line aloud to know what it says. The village will be all right. The winter that began this story still stands behind them, not as a threat now, but as a teacher whose lessons have been learned. The memory of it will guide 100 small choices in the weeks to come. And so the days move forward, not toward grand endings, but toward the ordinary triumph of seed taking root, hands finding work, and hearts learning the art of patience together. The first weeding comes before anyone quite feels ready for it. Knees press into the softening ground, and hands learn again the small mercy of loosening soil around a tender stem without breaking it. Hoes move in a slow rhythm, scratching out the fine green thread of weeds that would steal strength if left alone. Thomas works down a strip with care, drawing a narrow line of cleared earth along each row. He keeps his body easy, saving his back by changing hands often, turning the work into a kind of walking prayer. When a lark lifts straight up from the next field and hangs there singing, he smiles without pausing. Isabel walks the headland with a basket of bread heels and a jug of small ale, kneeling now and then to free a caught leaf or to press a bit of soil back over seed that wind has teased away. She learns the field's new language by touch, and it begins to answer her. Sir Aldrich checks the markers where damp ground lies. He sets a simple twine line with bits of rag that flutter and keep the birds honest. He laughs with the children who carry clappers, appointing them wardens of the rows, a grand title for a good game. A thin green swath appears across the field after a weak barley showing stride by stride, oats just behind, peas peeping along the outer edge. You have to bend low to see it at first, but once you see it, you cannot unsee it, the color like a thought turning true. Milk runs richer now that cows have calved. In the dairy, a big pot warms on gentle heat. Isabel watches the dairymaid set the curd and cut it with a long knife, the neat squares drifting like pale bricks in quiet water. Fresh cheese takes its shape in simple baskets, whey running clear as a bell tone. Thomas trades a morning's labor, mending a fence for a cup of fresh curds with a sprinkle of salt. He carries it home as if it were a treasure, and Maud laughs when he insists it be eaten slowly, with bread and nothing else, so the newness has room to be tasted. Sir Aldrich rides the riverbank, where the thaw has fattened the water. It speaks fast and a little wild under the bridge, testing the braces the carpenters set. He leans from the saddle and lays a hand to the beam as if he could read timber by touch, and finds it steady. Rain comes in the night and leaves the morning shining. The thatch whispers as it dries, and the road holds shallow mirrors of sky where cartwheels cut arcs through clouds. People step around puddles without minding their boots. The air smells clean and green. Thomas feels a catch in his back from hours bent over rows and decides to mend by moving. He shoulders a light load of kindling and carries it down lane to the cottage whose hearth smoke has been thin. The widow Agnes pretends not to see the kindness and trades him a story about her wedding day as payment. He stands in the doorway and listens until the kettle sings. Isabel writes in her small ledger that 3 households will need seed again in autumn, and that to have strength to lend, beneath the figures, in a margin. She writes another line, remember to teach the children the bird-scaring rhyme with the gentle ending, the one that thanks the birds for leaving what they leave. Sir Aldrich calls Thomas to the bridge with him, when the river rises 2 handspans in a day. Together they lay another brace against the current and weight it with stone. Cold water slips over their boots, cold air stings their cheeks. When the river climbs and then decides, at last, to pause and fall, both men grin and say nothing. Palm Sunday brings branches to hands where palms do not grow. Willow wands bend and shine in the morning light. Children wave them and whisper the words they half remember from last year, more song than speech. Doorframes hold a branch each by afternoon, a green promise tucked against old wood. Thomas carves a spoon from a scrap of applewood in the evening, the blade making a soft whisper as shavings curl and fall. He rubs it smooth with a bit of wax and turns it in his hand until it feels right. The next day, without explanation, he leaves it on the sill of the manor kitchen, where a cook with tired wrists will find that it fits her hand like luck. Isabel kneels to help a mother soothe a fretful baby and hums the lowest line of a hymn until small shoulders loosen and tiny eyes blink slow. Later, she realizes she was humming the same rhythm Thomas used with the oxen at the first furrow and smiles at how work and comfort share a beat. Sir Aldrich receives Lord Geoffrey's careful talk again, as steady and unblinking as candlelight on brass, about roads and marriages and the proper tying of lands to other lands. He listens, and when it is time to speak, he chooses words that set space around Isabel's choice rather than crowding it. Holy Week slows the village to a quieter step. Work continues, but voices drop, and people meet each other's eyes a little longer before they speak. On Friday, the bell rings in a low, thoughtful way, and even the dogs fall silent for a moment. Easter morning rises bright after fog. Eggs are boiled and colored where the habit lives, and children race to find ones half hidden in grass. In cottages that can spare them, eggs make their way into a rare thickening of a morning porridge, the meal tasting of celebration and relief. Thomas brings a woven nest of eggs to the old shepherd, whose hands shake more than they did last spring. The old man chuckles and says the hens are preachers today, preaching patience and reward in equal measure. Thomas laughs and repeats the line later in the lane, where it becomes a saying people decide to keep. Isabel steps into the church in a gown with a simple new ribbon and feels the ease of a day that remembers joy. After service, she stands in the yard and speaks to the girls about planting beans along the warm walls by their doors. Small gardens make big differences in hungry months. Sir Aldrich works his way through the crowd with a nod and a word, an easy man among easy faces. When he reaches Isabel, he bows a little lower than necessary, and when he reaches Thomas, he claps his shoulder in a way that looks like friendship and feels like respect. The first weeding gives way to the second as days ease longer. The hose blade flashes in the sun, and the rows keep their edges. Peas find their sticks and reach with amused little hands, curling around what was set out for them as if they had always known the plan. Thomas brings water to the field in a small barrel on a sled, tipping a dipper here and there at edges that dry too fast in a wind. He sets the sled in the shade between trips and shares a laugh with a neighbor about how a man can move half as much water as a cloud and still feel proud. Isabel visits a cottage where fever has kept a man from the field and leaves a small loaf, a strip of bacon, and 2 candles without counting the cost. She sits a moment on a stool and listens to the wife describe how the fever broke in the night when the window was opened to the sound of rain. They nod together at the good sense of air and water. Sir Aldrich settles a small dispute at the market cross with a steady tone. Whose pig found whose acorns under, whose hedge, and everyone goes home, feeling slightly cleverer and friendlier than when they arrived. He writes nothing down. The agreement sits fine in the air. A wind from the west drags a short storm over the village one afternoon, fast and more noisy than harmful. Rain knocks the petals from an early plum. Hail rattles on the thatch and melts before it can settle. People pause in doorways and watch it pass like an impatient guest, then step back into their tasks. Thomas takes Maud to the far acre and teaches her the proper way to thin turnips, bold and kind at once, leaving space so what remains can thrive. She winces at pulling up anything that worked hard to sprout, and he nods because that is a good ache to feel. Isabel sits with the midwife and learns how to set a shoulder back with the gentle turn of a child instead of force. She practices with a wrapped bundle and then laughs at her own concentration, relieved that learning new things feels like spring, too. Sir Aldrich inspects the hay meadow, running grass through his fingers as if tasting it with his skin. He shakes his head at the hedge's low spots and makes a note to bring men with stakes and mallets before the flock finds the gap on a moonlit night. Warm days multiply. Women rinse linen in the stream and lay it on bushes to dry, cloth flashing like flags along the bank. Children chase each other around the posts of a new fence, shrieking in a key that somehow makes the day feel larger. Thomas sits at his threshold of an evening and plays the tin whistle he pretended was for someone else. The tune meanders and then finds its way home. A neighbor hums along without realizing it, and a cat blinks approval from the step. Isabel walks to the willow at the headland. In the late light, she stands still enough to let swallows stitch the air around her, their flight as quick as a thought and as sure. Thomas lifts a hand from the field. She lifts hers, and nothing more needs to be said. Sir Aldrich rides the ridge and looks down at the village stitched to its fields. He feels the way the land holds people and the way people hold the land, and he lets the understanding sit without telling it where to go. Lord Geoffrey speaks more gently of the future now. He mentions the name of a distant cousin as a possibility, and then says he will wait for better weather to decide anything. He is learning that some decisions benefit from rain as much as fields do. The early greens begin to give themselves up in little handfuls. Chives by the door, sorrel from the ditch edge, young nettles from the sunny bit beside the woodpile. Porridge gets brighter. Faces do too. Thomas brings a small bundle of wood garlic to Isabel by the headland without stepping too close, leaves it on a stone, and nods. She laughs softly, thanks him by name, and ties it with a ribbon to hang in her kitchen for a day before the scent fills the house. Sir Aldrich walks past and pretends not to notice, which is its own kind of noticing. He carries a new leather thong for his bridle and is pleased with the way it feels in his hand. The present contentment making room for the rest. May Day arrives on the wind with blossom scent. The village sets a pole in the green, not grand but straight, with a few ribbons and a ring of flowers freshening it. People circle slowly, not for show but for the comfort of moving together. Thomas dances one careful turn with Maud, laughing when she steps on his toe and apologizes as if she had broken a law. He bows, once exaggerated, and makes her grin. Isabel watches from the edge, and then allows herself to be pulled in for a gentle circle with the baker's wife. Her laughter is low and real, and she lets it stay. Sir Aldrich keeps to the outside, guarding the joy, without owning it. When a barrel threatens to tip, he steadies it. When a child trips, he sets her back on her feet with a smile that says, "The ground and he are on good terms." Evening finds the village quieting under a sky that finally looks like summer in training. Lamps are lit, doors are left a little ajar. A story drifts out of one cottage and into the next, like the smell of soup. Thomas, tired in the good way, sets his tools in order for morning, and sits a minute to think about a future that is not a plan, only a feeling. It is enough. Isabel writes a short letter by lamplight, not to anyone in particular, just a few lines to the season itself, thanking it for holding back disaster and for offering clean work to willing hands. She folds the letter and tucks it into her psalter like a pressed flower. Sir Aldrich closes his notebook on a page where the sums and the feelings agree. He looks out the window at the shadow of the willow and then at the line of the bridge and decides he can sleep. In the night, a soft rain begins, and the sound on the thatch is like kind words spoken in a quiet voice. Sleep takes the village in one piece, a deep, uncomplicated drift. Morning rises green and generous. The fields hold their color without arguing. Birds gossip in the hedges. The world looks, for a little while, easy. Thomas shoulders his hoe and goes back to the rows. Isabel her basket and her list. Sir Aldrich his hammer and his reins. Each of them returning to the same work with the same calm faith that has carried them from frost to flowers. Rogation days come with soft steps and leafy crosses. The village walks the bounds together, singing low, stopping at stones and hedges to tap them with sticks and remember. Children learn the edges of their world by foot and song, and the fields feel blessed simply because so many careful eyes have passed over them. Thomas sharpens his scythe with a slow, even stroke. The sound of the whetstone against the blade is a kind of music, bright and sure. He tests the edge with a thumbnail and nods, satisfied, then hangs the stone from his belt, where it will knock gently against his thigh as he walks the meadow. Isabel brings a small basket of oatcakes and a jug of mild ale to the hay meadow at first light. Dew beads the grass, and when the sun lifts, it flashes like 1,000 tiny mirrors. She sets the basket in the shade of a cart and ties her hair back with a strip of cloth the color of barley. Sir Aldrich stands at the field's margin and watches the first swath lie down under Thomas's blade. He smiles at the clean line and moves to help lift the cut grass onto swathes with a wooden rake. Rank and title mean little to hay. Hay respects only timing and hands. The meadow breathes as the sides move, a long, slow exhale with each guiding step. Men cut in staggered lines, clean and close. Behind them, women and older children spread the grass to catch the day's warmth, flipping it with rakes so sun and wind can enter every layer. By midday the scent is sweet and deep, a summer perfume that speaks of winter to come. Thomas turns a swath with practiced arms, careful not to clump, careful not to leave it too thin. He knows hay is memory made visible, a promise folded for a colder time. Isabel's cheeks glow with the small labor of carrying cups and bread, and she stops now and then to lift a strand of hay and rub it between her fingers. When it squeaks faintly, she grins and nods, as if the meadow has just told her a good joke. Sir Aldrich watches the sky more than the ground. He notes the height of the clouds, the mood of the wind, the way swallows stitch low when weather leans toward a change. He keeps a cart at the ready, just in case the day decides to test them. By late afternoon, they cock the hay into small heaps against any stray damp. Thomas sets his ricks, true, narrow at the top, neat as writing. He plants a forked stick at the heart of one to mark it for the widow Agnes. Winter will not catch her short if he can help it. Isabel draws a chalk mark on a small slate for each rick finished, not for glory, but to remember how much work will stand by them in January. She writes a few names, too, next to the marks, so praise and thanks land in the right laps. Sir Aldrich walks the line of ricks and presses a palm to each, reading their firmness. He fixes one leaning stack with 3 quick tugs and a laugh that everyone hears. The day ends with an easy tiredness and the good weight of a meal waiting. Shearing follows close behind. The flock comes to the pen with a steady tide of soft bodies and patient eyes. Shears flash, the open and close a rhythm as old as any song. Wool falls away in blankets that roll and tie neatly under practiced hands. Thomas eases way to the ground and works the blade so it kisses, not bites. He murmurs nonsense kindly, and the way blinks as if the world is being gently rewritten. When he stands, fleece bundled, his forearms show a map of tiny white scrapes, badges he barely notices. Isabel carries bowls of water for the shearers and a handful of salt for a small cut, not many today. She watches fleeces handed to girls who skirt and sort, picking out burrs and thorns, and she decides to set aside the best for a winter cloak that will warm a mother who has none. Sir Aldrich oversees the tally, how many fleeces, how fine, how many to send to the fuller in town, how many to keep. He negotiates with the shepherd in a tone that is respectful to knowledge learned entirely by weather and years. At the stream, women wash the fleeces that need it. The water runs pale and then clearer, and the wool, wrung and spread, lifts a bright, clean scent to the hedges. Spinners' fingers itch at the sight. Thread waits inside those curls like birds inside shells. Evening brings thunder that rumbles without insisting. People stand in doorways and count the seconds between flash and sound. When rain arrives, it is a curtain drawn and then gently pulled back. The hayricks glisten but hold. Timing has been kind today. Thomas sits with Maud on the threshold and shows her how to twist a wisp of washed wool between damp fingers until it becomes a thread. She laughs at the way it pulls and holds, at the way something loose can become strong with just a little patience. Isabel checks the storerooms and arranges a corner for herbs to dry. Thyme, sage, mint, a little yarrow. Summer's medicine, gathered on bright days, saved for winter nights. She ties bundles with a sparrow's care and writes the names on scraps of parchment. Sir Aldrich visits the bee skeps at the far hedge with the keeper, a man who speaks to bees as if to neighbors. Wax will mean candles, honey will mean comfort. They stand quiet, watchful, grateful for the small golden cities that hum through summer so winter can have light. A market day brings a hum of talk around the cross. Salt by the handful, iron by the bar, needles like bright fish. People trade stories as much as goods, and news travels faster than carts. The mill will need a new stone soon. The bridge holds. The baker's wife has a babe who sleeps at last. Thomas brings home a length of twine and a small awl. He mends the harness straps in the doorway, the tidy new holes marching cleanly in a line. He hums while he works, a tune that smells like hay in the sun. Isabel buys a little blue ribbon and does not decide who it belongs to, not yet. She also brings back a coil of stout thread from the weaver, paid for with a pot of the manor's honey. The exchange feels fair and sweet. Sir Aldrich returns with a new scythe ring and a sack of coarse salt. He nods to the reeve and makes a note in his head about the next fair, where he'll see if a better price can be had for wool. He keeps one eye on market sums and one on the lane, where the real economy walks. St. John's Eve comes with a soft bonfire on the green. Not a roaring blaze, just a friendly hill of flame that glows and cracks and draws people close. Children toss herbs into it, laughing at the spicy smoke. Some leap it in small steps, more for joy than for custom. Thomas stands back and watches the sparks climb like bees, rising to stars. He feels the shape of winter inside summer, a kind knowledge that makes him settle his shoulders and breathe easier. Isabel steps nearer the warmth and thinks of candles, of how light is gathered in one season for another. She thinks of promises, too, the spoken and the quiet kind, and how both need tending. Sir Aldrich holds a child's hand as she takes a tiny hop over a tiny flame. He bows to the bonfire as if to an elder, politely. Then he looks at the faces it lights and chooses to remember them exactly as they are, happy and unhurried. Work continues because it loves to. The herb garden beside the manor walks into fullness. The cottage plots crowd with beans and cabbage and cheerful marigolds that glow like pocket suns. Bees fatten. Chickens remember their trade and contribute accordingly. Thomas walks the hedges with a billhook trimming where growth has gone wild, leaving the flowering parts for bees. He sets a few quick stakes where the hedge has slumped and ties woven brush in place. Living fences, living promises. Isabel spends an afternoon in the dairy, learning how to churn summer milk into butter without losing patience. The slow turn becomes a meditation, and when the butter breaks, bright and sudden, she laughs in surprise, as if catching a shy child, finally smiling. Sir Aldrich convenes a small court under the elm, nothing grand. Just a handful of neighbors sorting out whose fence shifted a foot when the frost went out of the ground. They settle with a handshake and a shared drink. No parchment needed, the elm remembers. A short storm sweeps across one evening, tossing the willow and hammering on the thatch. People bring the animals in early, check shutters, and bank fires. Afterward, the air smells washed and sweet, like linen dried on a hawthorn hedge. Thomas inspects the ricks and pats the sides with satisfaction. He has laid thatch across their crowns to keep off the worst of the wet. He ties the last knot in a way an old man showed him long ago, a small trick that keeps a wind from teasing work apart. Isabel collects rainwater in a clean barrel and laughs at how different it feels on her skin from the well-esque cold clarity. She sets a bowl out in the kitchen garden to water the tenderest plants, because even water has character, and some characters are kind. Sir Aldrich walks the bridge after dark, lantern in hand, because sometimes a leader's quiet steps after a storm are as useful as a dozen orders before it. He listens to the river talk low and thinks of winter nights when this same water was hard as stone. He nods to both truths. Lambs show their summer mischief, fat and sure-footed now. Children chase them a little, and then lie down themselves in the warm grass. staring up where swallows knit air into patterns that only birds understand. The world is practicing ease. Thomas sits with Maud at dusk, teaching her knots that hold and knots that release, and how to know when each is called for. She learns fast and smiles with her whole face when a rope does exactly what she asked of it. Isabel writes a letter to a cousin she has not seen in years, not about marriages or estates, but about the willow tree, the first hay, the cheese that turned at exactly the right moment. She tucks a pressed marigold into the fold, a small summer sent by hand. Sir Aldrich reads a short note from his steward about a field boundary and feels, unexpectedly, peaceful. He writes back with a decision that favors patience over haste and closes with a line that thanks the man by name. Courtesy is a tool that never wears out. Through it all, winter stays present the way a teacher does in a good classroom, not looming, but looking on. Herbs hang to dry in the rafters. Tallow gets rendered on hot afternoons when a small heat in summer prevents a larger smoke in winter. Woodpiles grow neat and high against stable walls. Thomas sets aside a little of each good day for winter's sake. Extra armful of sticks, a handful of herbs, a coil of twine, a memory of where the hedgerow holds the driest kindling after a storm. He is building a season without frost, one small choice at a time. Isabel stores candles in a chest lined with linen, counting them softly, feeling their weight. She adds a beeswax taper with a smile, and thinks of Candlemas yet to come. One light remembered by another. Sir Aldrich ensures the mill race is clear of weed, so water can run freely when the year turns and the need is greater. He arranges for a spare spoke to be cut and seasoned now, while the wood is willing to learn the shape it will hold in cold. Evenings grow long and friendly, the air holding a kind of gold that touches faces and tools alike. Stories take their time. Songs remember extra verses. Sleep slips over the village like a soft shawl. And still, under the easy pace, the deeper work goes on, keeping faith with the land, with one another, and with the seasons that ask for steady hands and reward them with steady days. High summer settles in with a low, contented hum. The fields wear their best colors, barley, honey-bright, rye, with a sober sway. Wheat ripening to a soft gold that makes the horizon look gentle and sure. Bees work the clover with the focus of small craftsmen, and the river moves with that steady summer confidence that promises water will be there when it's asked for. Rumor moves too, as it always does when the sun lingers long. It loops through the lanes that Lord Geoffrey will press a betrothal before the harvest home, that Sir Aldrich is the likely match, that Lady Isabel is dutiful and calm. And then another rumor answers it in a softer voice, that some vows must be shaped by more than land and law. People nod at both, because summer is generous with possibilities. Midsummer's Day arrives with garlands. Girls plait flowers and green into rings. Boys pretend they do not care, and then care very much about where those rings go. The pole on the green is trimmed with a few ribbons, nothing grand, but bright enough to catch a child's eye. In the softest part of the afternoon, Isabel tosses a small wreath toward the crowd, laughing with the baker's wife. It arcs once, twice, and taps Thomas on the shoulder, because he turned at just the wrong moment. He catches it from habit more than intention, looks startled, and then because the whole village is watching, he bows with comic gravity and sets it back on the post where everyone can see it. Laughter unknots the moment, but the story grows legs and trots off down the lane anyway. Sir Aldrich sees all of this and smiles, because sometimes the day writes its own jokes, and only fools try to edit them. Work leans forward as the grain heads heavy. Sickles are checked and whetstones dipped, edges brought back to a whispering keen. Thomas tests a blade with his thumb and nods, satisfied. Isabel walks the headlands with a slate, marking which strips are ready, arranging the order so hands and carts are where they will be most useful. Sir Aldrich counts carts and checks axles, lays spare pins in a tidy row, and eyes the sky as if it is a fellow he must bargain with. Thunderheads gather one evening, tall and white, with bruised undersides, beautiful from a distance, and worrisome when you know what wet grain means. The village decides without anyone needing to say it. Up early, cut fast, bind tight, shock high. The next morning, the fields fill with a purposeful danceman, cutting in lines that ripple like wind over water. Women and older children binding sheaves with straw bands, building tidy shocks that lift the ears off the ground, so rain will slide off when it comes. By mid-morning, the first low growl rolls across the fields. The air smells metallic, like a key warmed in a hand. Thomas speeds his cut without rushing, a paradox learned from years of watching weather. Isabel moves from shock to shock, setting the last band firm, checking that each bundle is tight enough to stand a blow. Sir Aldrich calls for 2 carts to be loaded early and rolled to the barn, insurance against a big sky with fast ideas. The wind steps up, and a sheet of rain moves across the far meadow like a gray army. For a full minute you can watch it coming, then it arrives, hard and brief, drumming on cloth caps and bare arms, hurrying everyone's hands without tripping them. Sheaves tip, a few shocks lean. Thomas wades into the wet and rights them with quick shoulder shoves, binding anew where a straw rope has slipped. Isabel's gown clings, and her hair sticks to her cheek, and she laughs because the work is going well anyway. Sir Aldrich steadies a cartwheel in a rut with his boot and a burst of language he will confess on Sunday. Just as sharply as it came, the squall loosens its grip. The last raindrops fall fat and singular from a clean-edged cloud. Steam lifts off the warm earth. The shocks stand like small soldiers shaking off their cloaks, and the field breathes again. People cheer without quite meaning to. The day resumes its plan. By evening, the barn smells of new straw and grain, and the lofts take on their temporary sky of sheaves. Thomas stacks with the tidy caution of someone who does not want to spend a night repitching what a careless fork would undo. Isabel stands at the doorway, ticks off a final tally with wet slate, and, almost under her breath, thanks the weather as if it could hear. Sir Aldrich closes the barn doors with his shoulder and a satisfied grunt. The first skirmish with chance has gone in their favor. Then the millstone cracks. It happens with a sound like a muffled bell-no shout, no splintering catastrophe, just a wrong note in the middle of a day that was singing. The wheel slows. The gear teeth knock each other in an uneasy rhythm. The miller pulls the lever with both hands and lets the whole works sigh to a stop. Flour dust hangs in the air like a question. People gather in the doorway in ones and twos, whispering the words no one wants to say out loud. Without a stone there is no flour, and without flour the winter bread is smaller. Sir Aldrich arrives at a trot, hair damp with sweat from the field, and listens to the miller's careful account. He does not curse. He does not look for someone to blame. He simply says, the quarry and the road and the bridge. He looks at Thomas. Thomas nods. Isabel is already making a list. Oxen, chains, wedges, sledge, food for a day and a half. And a line at the bottom for candles, because they might be setting a stone at dusk. They leave before dawn, 2 ox teams, 6 men, the miller to fit the new stone, Sir Aldrich to command without saying he is, Thomas to do the work that always wants doing. Isabel stays to arrange meals, to mind the bridge crew that will stand ready with braces and planks if the river gets ideas, to meet them on the way back with what they didn't think to pack. The stone waits in the quarry like a round piece of moon that has decided to live on earth. It is larger than anyone remembers stones being. The carver runs a hand over its face the way a priest might bless a child, and nods. "It's good," he says. "It should outlast all of us if you treat it kindly." Sir Aldrich pays fair and quick. Thomas checks the sledge, tightens a chain, and they begin. The road home is a test written in ruts and slope and heat. The oxen lean, steady, and slow, shoulders shining. Men step with the load, not against it, letting their weight ride where it helps. Twice the sledge slides toward the ditch. Twice Thomas plants a lever under the edge. And twice Sir Aldrich sets his shoulder to the stone, and the world decides to be reasonable. At the bridge, the river runs friendly and brown, high enough to show its muscle, but without malice. The braces they set in spring look like sensible decisions made by younger men. Isabel stands at the near end with her hair tucked under a plain cloth, as if she had been a bridge worker all her life. She hands water up to the men, then steps back. The oxen step onto the timbers and feel them ring. The stone hums very softly, a deep note. Midspan, the sledge jerks. A pin pops, a chain lifts, and then slaps the wood. For one breath, the world narrows to a timber, a chain, a round weight with no patience for mistakes. Thomas is there before the second breath. He drops a block under the sledge with a clean, sharp move, and the stone settles an inch and no more. Sir Aldrich is already uncoiling the spare chain. Isabel kneels hand steady under the loosened pin like a surgeon's assistant. The miller's mouth moves in a prayer he does not know. He is saying. Someone on the bank starts a joke to break the spell and thinks better of it. The chain slides through, the pin seats, the oxen lean, and the bridge speaks in a single deep groan that turns, as the weight moves on, into a long exhale. When they step off onto the far bank, someone whoops, and then everyone pretends no one did. At the mill, they rig the hoist and work by lamplight. The old stone lifts like a tired giant and swings out of its chair. The new stone lowers, inch by careful inch, and when it seats, the sound is right, a note that settles in the chest. The miller sets the balance, checks the dress on the faces, breathes once, and pulls the lever. The wheel turns, the cogs engage, the stone hums, and the first fresh flower dusts the air, settling like a benediction on every upturned face. Isabel laughs, sudden and bright. Sir Aldrich closes his eyes for a heartbeat. Thomas touches the stone with 3 fingers, lightly, as if greeting an old friend who has just arrived in a new coat. When the first sacks are filled, the village drifts home in 2s and 3s. Sir Aldrich stops Thomas at the mill yard with a hand on his arm. For a moment, the night holds them like a secret. Aldrich says, "Lo, you are a good man." Thomas looks away, not out of false modesty, but because there is too much truth in the words to be stared at. Aldrich adds, I will do my duty, I will not do harm. Thomas nods once, and in that nod is an agreement that has nothing to do with paper and everything to do with winter. Not every test comes with thunderheads or cracked stones. One morning, Isabel finds a sack in the storeroom that is lighter than it should be. The chalk mark on the barrel is not at the height she left it. The almoner's list shows nothing odd. It is not rats. It is a hand, a hungry hand, likely. She does not shout or call for the reeve. She walks to the furthest cottage at the edge of the field and sits on the low stool without asking. The mother there stares at her lap. The child there does not stare at all. She sleeps too deeply for morning. Isabel sets a small loaf on the table, then a measure of grain, then 2 candles. She says, softly, next time, ask me first, so I can take the blame properly. The mother nods so hard, it looks like a bow. On her way back, Isabel stops the almoner and adds 3 names to the list he should have already had. Later she tells the steward, who tuts and counts, and she says, count people, not sacks. He says nothing, which is his way of agreeing. Sir Aldrich hears of it via a road of whispers, and makes one small adjustment no one sees. He posts a boy by the storeroom for a week, with a stool and a whistle, and a basket of apples. If anyone comes at night, the boy is to blow once, and share an apple first. The whistle never blows. The apples disappear in daylight, properly, one at a time. Harvest rolls on. Reapers from a neighboring hamlet come in for boon work, and the manor feeds them well. The song that keeps the sickles in time has a new verse. This year about a stone that walked over water, and a girl who caught a wreath and didn't tea. Everyone laughs where they are supposed to. Lord Geoffrey, for his part, begins again about betrothals and bridges and how marriages bind land to land. He is not unkind, but he is relentless in that way. The ledger is relentless. Isabel lets him finish and then sets a condition, gentle as a hand smoothing linen. After harvest home, she says, let those who would lead this place show what they would do in a brutal winter. Not just with words, with a plan, with people, with wood stacked and candles counted. Let the village choose whose plan keeps them warmest. Lord Geoffrey blinks at the novelty of democracy creeping into his hall, and then, to his credit, nods. He says, at least, we will be better prepared. Sir Aldrich hears this, and feels a steadiness rise in him he did not expect. Thomas hears of it 2 days later, and goes quiet, and then smiles into his sleeve, where no one can see. Tests still come in small, quick ways. One night, a spark leaps from a baker's oven and kisses the thatch of the next roof. The first cry cracks the air. Thomas is there with a ladder before anyone thinks to shout his name. Maud runs with a bucket line. Feet thud, water slaps, smoke folds and unfolds. Sir Aldrich shoulders up onto the roof without grace and with perfect effectiveness, beating at the edge with a wet cloth until the glow coughs and dies. Isabel organizes the children away from the line and then slips into it anyway when hands tire. Afterward, the night smells like steam and singed straw. A child laughs, the laugh of a fear passing away. The baker vows to bank his coals like a saint's relics. Everyone goes home tired and not alone. By Lammas, the first loaf is blessed, and the village breathes easier. The fields look less like savings and more like spending. Gleaners move in the margins with quiet determination, heads bent, hands busy. The ancient right of the poor to be the last harvesters honored, as law and mercy both. Isabel walks with them part of the way and sees that they are seen. Sir Aldrich rides the boundary slowly and turns his horse to block a boy who gets too bold in someone else's strip, then hands the boy a heel of bread and sends him back with a pat that is not a rebuke. Thomas gathers the fallen grain with a craftsman's eye and shows Maud how to bind a small sheaf that will stand with dignity next to larger ones. The village sets a day for harvest home, not the biggest feast in memory, but a good one, with a pig turned on a spit and apples tucked under pastry for a pie that will make children sigh. In the afternoon, on the green, under the same willow that watched them through winter, the plans are spoken. Sir Aldrich stands first and talks plainly, wood cut now and laid to season in covered stacks. Pete writes, negotiated for those without woodland, the bridge boarded tight against ice. Hay reserved for the weak and for the oxen, a schedule for road clearing, coin set aside for salt. He names men and tasks and dates. It is the language of a winter campaign, and the village nods because it is good. Thomas stands after, not on the wagon bed but on the ground. He speaks low, so people lean in and quiet themselves. He talks about hedges laid properly now, so wind breaks when it should. About a ditch line cut where meltwater always sits, so spring sickness finds fewer bodies. About a thatch gilled 2 nights a week, through autumn when the strong help mend the roofs of the weak, so sparks in January find nothing to catch. About a seed bag tied with a double knot and stored high. About a small reserve of tools under a shared lock for when a fire or flood takes someone's home. About the habit of carrying a candle to a neighbor when their light fails. He does not name himself as captain of anything. He names tasks, and he names neighbors. When he finishes, the silence has the shape of respect. Lord Geoffrey looks at his daughter, and then at the crowd, and then at Sir Aldrich, who nods once, as if to say that a good plan is a good plan no matter whose mouth gives it voice. Isabel thanks them both, not with a curtsy or a flourish, but with the weight of someone who will keep those promises in her hands until they are real. She names a day in late autumn when they will measure progress, and she writes the date on a scrap she tucks into her psalter beside the pressed marigold from months ago. The pages feel thicker now, heavier with kept vows. Evening lifts its lantern. Torches mark the edge of the green. The pie is carved. Ale moves from jug to cup and back again. Music finds its way, thin pipes and a drum with a good heart. Thomas dances with Maud, and then, shyly, with Isabel for one quiet turn that is more about thanks than anything else. Sir Aldrich stands aside, smiling, and when a child tugs his hand, he bows and joins the line, stepping with the grace of a man who has decided not to practice regret. Later, when the stars have climbed high and the torches have gone low, the village thins to doorways and steps. The willow rustles, the river talks, the mill hums just a little, as if keeping the world in time. The winter that once pressed hard against every breath feels far away, but not forgotten. Its lessons are inside people now, in the way wood is stacked, in the way names are remembered, in the way a hand reaches for a latch to knock before taking. There will be other storms and other cracked stones. There will be days when the wind forgets to be fair, and there will be mornings when a robin sits on the hedge and looks into the yard like a messenger from the simple side of things. On those mornings, Thomas will lift a hand, Isabel will lift hers, Sir Aldrich will tip his head and smile, and the village will carry on, not with magic, but with craft and kindness and the taste for small, honest drama that turns work into a story worth hearing. Autumn edges in on quiet feet. Mornings turn crisp and bright, and the air smells of apples and wood smoke. Fields that blazed with grain soften into stubble and sown strips, the earth tucked and ready to wait. In the orchard, trees bend with fruit. Apples shine with a waxy glow that looks like they've been polished by the cool. Pears sweeten and lean into their stems like sleepy lanterns. Children climb carefully, a foot here, a knee there, hands cupping the fruit before twisting it free. Thomas moves through the rows with a woven basket looped over his arm, testing an apple and listening for that clean, small snap. He rolls each one in his palm as if reading it. Bruised ones go to the press. Sound fruit stacks in wooden bins under straw. Isabel counts the bins with a bit of chalk, a line for each, then a cross through 4 lines for 5, a rhythm that pleases her tidy mind. She marks which house has empty barrels, which has clean cloths for straining, which needs a loan of both. Sir Aldrich inspects the old screw press in the yard behind the mill. The timber frame is sturdy, the great threaded spindle still true. He oils the nut that bites down and nods to the miller. They share a look of 2 men who remember last year's press and are glad to see the same tool again. A ring around the moon that night makes the village look up and murmur about frost. The air goes hard and clear. Isabel sets her jaw in a way that means decisions. Thomas fills a lantern and checks the press's wedges. Sir Aldrich says softly, "Tonight, then," and no one argues. They pick by lamplight, speech low and easy. Apples thump in the bins like gentle drums. The press takes the first layered cloths of chopped fruit, and the spindle turns, and amber juice runs in a rich, thin stream. Children are allowed a cup each and go very quiet when they taste it, surprised at how autumn can be both sharp and sweet. The frost walks carefully through the orchard toward dawn, dusting the low grass and painting leaf edges with silver. By then, the bins are stacked and the barrels bunged and tied. Thomas sets the last hoop on tight with a tap that echoes just enough to feel like a small celebration. Isabel writes cider in neat letters on a slip and tucks it under the bung with a grin. The miller's wife sets the barrels in a cool corner, and the air begins to fill with a scent that feels like a promise stored in wood. Sir Aldrich walks the lane home under a sky vibrating with stars. He breathes in the damp apple sweetness clinging to his clothes and thinks that some riches travel by scent and not by coin. The manor hall holds a line of people that looks like the year itself, each face a different season. Thomas stands before Lord Geoffrey with 2 measures of grain and a neat stack of thatch reeds tied with honest knots. The steward notes the tally. A family with too many eggs and not enough candles trades. A man with spare wood finds his cart lighter and his heart the same. He offers a small pouch of coin to cover a widow's arrears and lets the steward record it as if the sum had simply appeared like a change in the weather. The steward raises an eyebrow. Aldrich shrugs. The ledger hums a more forgiving tune that day. A wheel hums in a manor room where the air is still enough to keep threads even. Isabel joins with awkward fingers and gets an encouraging smile from a woman whose hands can spin in the dark. Isabel laughs at her own uneven thread and keeps going. Dyers set their pots where smoke will not stain the house, blue from woad. Maud holds up a strip of blue cloth to her face and preens. Thomas whistles a tune that matches the color's cheer. Sir Aldrich watches, fascinated, as grey wool becomes sky and sun and hearth. Breath hangs longer in the yard. People stand in doorways and measure the air with their faces. Winter is returning to its chair. Thatchers climb roofs in pairs. He leaves the ridge, neat as a parting combed into hair. From the ridge, he sees Isabel cross the green below, shawl tight, looking up just once to wave, and to check his line, he jokes to himself. Isabel rearranges the storerooms by the winter's logic. The things for later go deeper. Sir Aldrich takes men to lay a fresh line of faggots along a lane that drifts deep, a snow fence made of brush and good intent. A small drama ripples across the village when a fox decides the henhouse is a pantry. Feathers bloom in the yard like brief snow. Thomas follows light prints to the hedge and mends the wire with calm hands. Sir Aldrich walks the hedgerow that night and sees eyes like sparks and says, softly, "Not tonight, friend," and the eyes blink and vanish. All Hallows brings candles and soft voices. Thomas thinks of a grandfather's laugh. Sir Aldrich thinks of a brother. The village walks home quieter and closer. Martinmas arrives with a serious air and a full day's work. Fat rendered into tallow for candles and for cooking. Skins scraped and set aside for winter leather. Children are kept away. They will taste the feast later and learn the reverence when they are older. Thomas helps the butcher and carries heavy tubs without complaint. He thinks not in terms of hunger, but of plenty properly managed. Isabel helps count out the shares, fair and firm, making sure the poorest households are not left looking at empty hooks, she says, as if to the wall, that a village is only as warm as the coldest cottage. Sir Aldrich takes a portion to the church stoop for alms, and a portion to the guardhouse for those who will watch the lanes in bad weather. His fairness is a habit now. Lanterns bloom in small hands that evening. St. Martin's light, walking soft through early dark. Children sing gently, their voices a little wobbly and completely brave. People step to their doors and listen without moving, as if a flock of kind birds had landed outside and might fly if startled. The first real frost returns one night and holds. Windows bloom with ferny patterns. Water pales skin over puddles, crack under a heel with a sound that is both satisfying and sobering. In the morning, smoke rises straighter than it has for months. Thomas tests the barn doors and finds them solid. He shakes the latch like a man greeting an old friend. He breathes into his hands and finds the air biting but honest. He is ready and knows it. Isabel lights a candle and writes a short letter to herself, the kind she will read on the hardest night. It lists nothing, no sacks, no chords of wood-only truths. The village will hold. Kindness is fuel. Patience is a blanket. Work is warmth. She tucks the letter into her psalter by the pressed marigold. Sir Aldrich walks the bridge before dawn and taps each brace with the haft of his knife, listening for the tones he knows by heart. The river runs lower now, steady and cold, a winter voice. He whispers a thanks to wood and water alike, and turns homeward with a smile he can feel in his shoulders. In the manor hall, Lord Geoffrey speaks again of marriage, but not as a command. He asks, and he listens. Isabel answers, with a calm that makes the tapestries seem more certain on the walls. She says she will not tie to lands with a knot that ignores the village's voice. She will serve this place through the winter as her first vow. In the spring, if the village is pleased and the plans have kept them warm, she will speak again. Sir Aldrich inclines his head in the way that men do when they decide to be better than they were taught. He says he is at the village's service regardless of what spring brings. He looks at Lord Geoffrey and then at Isabel and feels an odd lifting, like setting down a weight he had not known he carried. Thomas hears of the talk in a sideways way, from a baker who heard it from a scullion who heard it from a door that was a little open. He says nothing and simply works as if the winter were already here and watching. A storm tests the thatch and the hedges, a night of restless wind and rain that rakes the roofs and makes the mill creak and settle. Thomas steps out twice to check the tie on a rick. He comes back in with a face damp and satisfied. Maud eyes him and shakes her head like a mother, which makes him grin. Isabel walks the upper corridor with a candle hooded by her hand, listening for a sound that says a shutter is loose or a tapestry is tapping like a politely insistent guest. Nothing calls out, and that, too, is an answer. Sir Aldrich learns the pleasure of sleeping through a storm because he trusts his own work and the work of those around him. It feels like a new kind of wealth. The morning after is washed and bright. A rainbow leans on the hill as if tired from its night job. The village nods to it and gets on with the day. Cloth comes off the loom at last. Winter's coats still on the warp, but ready to be fullered and finished. Isabel runs her hand over the new wool with the pride of a craft learned through patience that is not her own. She orders one cloak made for a woman who has always given her own to someone colder. Thomas fits new pegs into his clogged soles, raising his feet a finger's width above wet lanes. He smiles at the sound they make, knock like the village, answering its own door. He adds a fresh layer of straw inside for warmth and thinks himself clever in a way that needs no witness. Sir Aldrich tries on a pair of felted mitts and laughs out loud at how quickly they turn his hands into summer. He buys 3 pairs and pretends one is for him and 2 are for the men on bridge duty. Later, he admits he kept 2 and gave 1 away. The men call him soft and thank him twice. The last of the apples are turned into vinegar and set with labels where the winter pickles will ask for them. The last onions go high, away from mice who are thinking about moving indoors. The last herbs are tied, and the bundles tap gently when the door opens, as if wishing good luck. On a gray afternoon, the village's winter council gathers in the green-s little shelter. The same plan they spoke at Harvest Home now set in tidy rows on a scrap of parchment. Wood is stacked, candles are counted, hedges are laid, ditches are cut, the bridge is braced, the millstone hums. The poor are on a list that includes dates and duties, not pity. Isabel reads the line about the Thatch Guild and smiles at Thomas without looking too long. Sir Aldrich adds a note about a second sledge for snow, to be stored at the far end of the village. Thomas marks it down and says, "I'll build it," and 2 men say, "With," and the work is already halfway done. The first snow comes carefully, as if testing the fit of the world. It settles on the willow, on the bridge rail, on the ridge lines of cottages. Children run with their mouths open to catch it on their tongues. Grown-ups pretend to scold and then do the same when no one is looking. Thomas steps into the lane and lets the snow land on his eyelashes. He blinks and laughs and thinks, yes, it is time. Isabel lights a candle in the window of the manor's smallest room, the one that faces the village and the mill. The flame looks small, but it throws a calm, honest light onto the snow. Sir Aldrich stands at his door and lifts his face to the sky as if greeting an old teacher. He says, quietly, "We're ready." And the sky sighs a soft answer that sounds like snow finding the ground. The winter that once felt like a siege now feels like a season, with terms they understand. They have cider in barrels, cloth on pegs, wood in stacks, salt in sacks, plans on paper, and kindness in motion. There are questions people still ask in the quiet. What will spring decide for hearts and houses? How will the village speak when it is time to choose? Those answers do not come tonight, and that is fine. Tonight the snow writes gentle lines down the lane, and the village reads them and rests. Thomas banks the fire. Maud sets the last bowl aside. Isabel tucks her letter deeper into the psalter. Sir Aldrich loops the last strap on his lantern and hangs it by the door. The embers glow, and the house hums that winter song of wood and wool and breath. When sleep comes, it comes as a good companion does, unannounced and certain. It finds them ready. It finds the village whole. The thaw begins with a quiet drip that turns to a steady conversation. Icicles thin to glass beads, and then to nothing. Snow slumps back into itself and slips away along the ditches, leaving the lanes glossy and uncertain. The kind of mud that tries to keep your boot and laughs about it later. Thomas measures the field edges with his eyes and his boots, reading the soft places like an old letter. He takes a spade to the worst of it, cutting small channels from puddle to ditch, coaxing water toward the river with the patience of someone who has learned that persuasion works better than argument, even with mud. Isabel stands under the willow at the headland and watches meltwater write quicksilver lines across the brown. She carries a basket of straw to spread over the earliest greens by the church wall, a thin blanket that keeps spring's brave beginnings from losing their nerve. Sir Aldrich walks the bridge at noon when the ice upriver loosens its grip. He listens to the water not fast yet, but purposeful, and checks every brace laid in autumn. He runs a hand over the boards and smiles when the wood answers in a tone he trusts. The village remembers how to be careful in a different way now. Sledges retreat to sheds. Carts come forward again. Straw is laid at doorways. A plank appears over the boggy bit behind the mill where children always find the deepest patch first. Laughter returns in wet, happy shouts, followed by mothers' practiced scolds that sound more like songs. The river tests them one night, as rivers will when winter lets go all at once. An ice raft breaks free upstream and hurries toward the bridge like a messenger who doesn't know his own strength. A boy at the mill hears the sound turn from water to something with edges and runs, legs pumping, breath smoking, to the bell. He rings out a pattern the village agreed on in autumn. Doors open, lanterns lift. The night gathers itself to act. Thomas reaches the bank with a lever and a rope. Sir Aldrich is already on the span, lantern hooded eyes on the black sheen sliding toward them. Isabel arrives with men carrying poles and one with a long hook, bringing also what the river never thinks to bring: hot ale and a few words that turn fear into focus. There is no panic. Winter taught that out of them the raft shoulders into the beam placed for exactly this mistake. The bridge shivers. The beam holds. Men with poles lean, push, coax. Thomas sets the lever under a wedged chunk and gives it the sort of nudge you'd give a stubborn ox firm, not angry. Sir Aldrich's call moves along the line. The ice swings, sighs, and slides away along the far bank, like a sulking guest shown the door. The river resumes its proper voice. Isabel laughs once, quiet and relieved, and the sound carries farther than it should in the cold. Morning looks as if nothing happened, which is how you know people did what they should when it mattered. Plough Monday arrives with a bell that sounds almost cheerful. The priest walks a simple blessing of the first furrow, and men and women touch the plough handles as it passes like a reassurance. Thomas checks the share's edge with a thumbnail and the depth with his eye, and sets the oxen to the strip that has been waiting since snow fell. The land opens with a sigh and a smell that makes even the sternest faces soften. Isabel stands at the headland with a tied bag of seed and a short, sensible list. Below the names of those who borrow she has left space for, thanks written 6 months from now. She moves with the sowers, not above them, fingers dusted with grain. The cloth of her sleeves making that quiet sound you hear when someone is working in earnest. Sir Aldrich rides the boundary and tosses scraps of wool into the worst ruts, an old trick learned from an older shepherd to give wheels purchase until the ground remembers itself. He notes the spots where a new ditch will save a day's worth of frustration next year. He likes thinking ahead. It feels like leaving small gifts for his future self. The first mud is a drama of its own. Clogs cake and are knocked clean against doorstep stones. Children in high spirits try to step only on the higher bits and laugh when they fail. The cat, offended at the state of the world, leaps from barrel to sill with precise disdain and a tail like a punctuation mark. Thomas mends a harrow tooth in the lane and looks up when a cart squeals at the corner. An axle has decided to be an idea rather than a fact. He steps across, lays the cart down with an easy tilt, pegs the join with a new dowel, and seats it with a solid tap he learned from a man who never hurried and always finished. The carter grins. The cart rolls on. For small problems do not become one large one. Isabel spends a morning at the dairy, showing a girl how to stir a pot of curds without scorching. The white squares drift and firm under her spoon. When the cheese is tied and hung, she marks a line in her little book. Fresh cheese to Agnes and to the mother with the twins. Just a sliver, she writes, a bit of brightness. Sir Aldrich walks the mill race with the miller and kicks away last year's reeds so the water will run without haggling. He traces the stone's hum with his fingertips, pleased at how the sound has deepened with use. The new stone has settled into the village's rhythm the way a good man does quietly, usefully, without demanding applause. Spring's first real quarrel arrives not from weather, but from a person. Lord Geoffrey's cousin Reynard rides in with the first real warm wind, a man with an easy grin and a cloak that speaks of towns more than fields. He eats well at the high table, compliments the cook, and, with a pleasant flourish, presents a small casket of spices and a folded length of fine linen to Isabel. He speaks of alliances and cities and the grateful gratitude of cousins doing the right thing at the right time. He speaks as if history had been invited to dinner. Isabel's smile is kind and exact. She thanks him for the linen and sends the spices to the kitchen with a note that says to save them for a feast. She listens to his practiced ease and feels, not anger, but a pleasant clarity settle in her bones, like the way a good cloak sits just so across the shoulders. The village has longer memories than cloaks. It remembers the winter plantha, brush fences, the thatch guild, the bridge that hummed instead of broke, the hand that placed a candle stub on a stoop without asking for thanks. It remembers Sir Aldrich's shoulder under a beam, and Thomas S. Lever at the river, and Isabel S. herb box on a cold night. When Lord Geoffrey convenes the promised spring council in the hall, the room is warm with more than fire. The steward sits ready with ink. The reeve clears his throat, and then does not speak, as if preferring to listen to the shape of the room. Sir Aldrich stands with his hands easy at his sides. Thomas stands by the door, hat in hand. As always, because the door is a good place to hear a whole room, Cousin Reynard leans as if to be thought casual. Isabel takes her place without flourish and lifts her chin. She speaks first, not as a daughter or as a prize in a story, but as the keeper of a ledger that counts warmth and wood as clearly as coin. She lays out what held in winter. She names names. She speaks of plans that did not wait for spring to look clever. Then she says, calm as Candlemas light, that any tie she makes must honor the work that keeps this place whole. She will not be bartered clean of conscience. She will not be hurried by a clock that runs only in a cousin's head. When she binds her future, it will be with someone who has already learned how to carry this village through a hard season. Lord Geoffrey opens his mouth and then, perhaps surprising himself, closes it again and nods. The hall breathes out. Cousin Renard smiles in a way that shows good teeth and little listening. He says there are other winters, the winters of negotiation and parchment. He says a marriage can be a bridge. Sir Aldrich says, quietly, bridges bear weight because of braces you cannot see. He gestures toward the window where the real bridge stands, as if that is answer enough. The reeve clears his throat, as if for courage, and says what everyone else is thinking. We have already chosen the hands we trust when the air turns hard. He looks at Isabel, then at Thomas, then at Sir Aldrich, and he adds, a little shyly, we can leave the rest to spring. Renard laughs, pleasant still, and bows. He says he will ride on to another cousin with a warmer hall and a quicker ledger. He leaves 2 days later, having charmed the children with city riddles and no one else with anything that matters. In the fields, the work does not pause to applaud the hall. Seed goes out, rows take shape. The first neat green shows through brown, like letters on a page that has finally dried. Spring unfolds its calm banners, lambs on sure legs, bees at the willow. They sound like quiet bells when rain touches puddles, the rich, clean smell of earth turning to food. Thomas sets a stake at the corner of a field to mark the depth that suits this soil best. And he teaches Maud how to tell readiness by touch and by sight. And by the way the blade sounds in ground that wants to be worked, she learns fast. He pretends she does not learn faster than he did. Isabel carries the blue ribbon Sir Aldrich bought in summer and ties it to the willow at the headland in a simple loop. It looks like sky that forgot itself and came down to rest for a while. She says, softly, we will choose in our time, and the ribbon flutters an answer that no one else hears. Sir Aldrich rides with a carpenter to the far bank, where a small footbridge lost a plank to the thaw. He kneels, nails, and sets the new board with the satisfaction of a man who prefers wood's honesty to a courtier's wit. He comes back through the lane and stops to lift a toddler who has fallen, and he sets the child back on small feet with an apology to the ground for being too interesting. Easter arrives with a sky as clean as linen. Bells ring. Eggs knock against each other and crack with a sound like tiny doorways opening. Children hunt, laugh, hide, repeat. A bowl of custard appears in the manor kitchen, sweetened with the last jar of apple syrup, and the cook lets Isabel lick the spoon as if she were a child herself. She does, and laughs, and thinks of winter nights and their good, strict lessons. After service, the willow's shade fits everyone perfectly. Thomas leans a moment against the trunk and watches the wind make the new leaves tremble like thoughts that have just found words. Isabel stands a pace away, the ribbon overhead moving in a tidy dance. Sir Aldrich comes up slow and stands with them in a triangle so comfortable it feels like a room. They do not say much. They do not need to. The vow is not a ring yet, not a word spoken in front of a priest, not even a date on a page. It is something quieter and tougher, 3 people agreeing, each according to their place, to keep this place good. It is a promise that has already been kept and will be kept again. The first fair weather of real spring makes the road dry underfoot. Market day hums, salt and iron, needles and thread, a new pot from a brazier with a tidy hand, a sack of woad like sky caught in cloth. Thomas buys a new whetstone, running his thumb along its edge, as if the stroke were already in his hand. Isabel trades cider for thread and a seed packet with more hope than seed inside it. Sir Aldrich puts coin down for a second set of braces, for the bridge insurance is a sweet word when you hear it in wood. By the time May steps out properly, the world is green enough to make everyone forget for a moment that it was ever any other color. The pole on the green gets a ring of flowers, not grand, just enough to say, "We noticed." People circle, careful and pleased. Isabel allows herself to be pulled into the ring. Thomas, shy, laughs and follows. Sir Aldrich, smiling, guards the outside, and then, when a child tugs his sleeve, steps in for one easy turn. There will be another winter, of course. That is what years do, turn and return. But it will find a village that has taught itself how to answer a hard season with even hands and clear plans, and how to fit love into the work without breaking either. It will find wood stacked like promises, candles counted like prayers, a bridge that sings the right note when the river runs hard, and 3 people who have learned to keep their hearts as steady as their tasks. On a soft evening when swallows write fast poems across the sky, Isabel reads the letter she wrote in winter and smiles at how true it still is. Thomas sets his tools in order with the satisfaction of a man who will use them in the morning. Sir Aldrich closes his notebook on a page where the numbers and the feelings agree. The willow moves as if to applaud something small and perfect. When night gathers, it does so kindly. The village rests, the earth turns. Somewhere, a newborn lamb makes that funny little sneeze that sounds like surprise at being alive, and a mother hushes it with a breath. Plans become sleep. Sleep becomes the next good day.